What we have here is a brief review of what scaffolding is, for those of you that would like a refresher. So scaffolding is a term used in the building industry initially to describe a temporary platform used to provide support. A scaffold gets people to a higher level that they cannot reach without support. And if you're thinking, gee, that sounds an awful lot like Vygotsky, you're right. It's more about the zone of proximal development. It's how we are coached and how we learn new things. And most of what we've learned because we've learned them from other people. And as teachers, you are asked to help students learn, and scaffolding is one of the primary ways and most effective ways to do that. And that is why we're asking you to make sure that your lessons are scaffolded for student learning. But what does that mean? We're really talking about two types of scaffolding. These types of scaffolding are intimately related, but there are some significant differences between them. There's instructional scaffolding, which you're aiming to provide a gradual release of responsibility for the students so they become independent learners. And you're also scaffolding the content, teaching the content step by step in increasing complexity so students can master that content. So you're looking, when you scaffold, at independence and mastery. Most of what we're probably going to see in your units will be a mastery type scaffolding, but you will include some things that will both support independent learning, as well as mastery. So let's talk first about gradual release of responsibility, because you'll see the strategies are very similar between supporting students becoming independent learners and supporting students in the mastery of content. So always in terms of scaffolding, you start with explicit instruction. You start with direct instruction. Here's what I'd like you to learn. And then you use these strategies to bring in the students. It's very constructivist. You bring in the students, you get them involved in what they're learning. They participate in how they're learning and how they're learning how to learn, so the metacognitive piece of that. Guided practice with corrective feedback, guided practice with teacher guidance, working together in maybe teams or pairs, and independent practice, so that they have then mastery of the material. Another way to look at it is something you're probably familiar with from Teach Like a Champion, the I do, we do, you do model. This has been around forever. It just keeps getting rephrased, but this is a very nice, concise way to look at it. And again, that you do coached part is really that zone of proximal development. But it depends on that modeling, that initial modeling. So in your lessons, as you're designing it, you always want to have a piece where you model what you're asking students to do. If you're working with really gifted students, don't just assume that they don't need the modeling. Sometimes the modeling actually helps them too. If you think about learning music, sometimes a music learner needs to hear the piece of music before they start deconstructing it, analyzing it, and putting it back together. So modeling is an extremely valuable tool. So that was the independence. This is a very quick review. If you want more information, you can get it through the materials that you have to read for class, and you can also get it online. There's plenty of material about scaffolding online. So content scaffolding is a little different. The first thing you want to do is access and connect with students' prior knowledge. What do they know about the topic that you're teaching or the theme that you're teaching? What do they already know? What little pieces, parts, or big pieces do they already have in their awareness and their cognition? Next, you want to set a foundation based on that prior knowledge, but you also want to make sure that the basic assumptions and necessary prior learning are understood. So, and I'll give you a very, very simple example, adding 2 plus 2. If they can add 2 plus 2, great. They can, add single digit numbers. You can either add higher level single digit numbers, or they'll be ready to progress to double digit numbers. But if they can't add 2 plus 2, you're not going to take them up to double digit numbers when they can't add to single digit numbers, for example. And then, so the prior learning is what they need to have in advance of the new learning that you're presenting through the content of your unit. And then step by step, you're going to add on to that foundation the information, skills, and strategies that they need to learn for the content area that you're teaching. So you're teaching them all these different facets of what they will eventually be able to remember on their own and work with on their own and do on their own. You want them to learn to research and ask questions and work in partners and get where access information. Where can they get that information? And hopefully they'll remember some of the content in the process. And then finally, as students become more fluent in the content, you increase the complexity and depth step by step. So it's all about making steps, very specific, intentional steps for students as they learn the material that you're using. And as they do that, they also become more independent. So you're actually scaffolding the content and you're scaffolding their independence at the same time. Some strategies that you can use for scaffolding include modeling with think-alouds, breaking a topic into parts, using a graphic organizer or mind maps, creating opportunities for student conversation and discussion, but intentional, not just, oh, let's all talk about this. You really want to have some intentionality behind the things you do and to explain to students why you're doing these things. Always explain why. Again, you're not going to probably put all of that in your lessons, but so I'm doing a little teaching coaching in addition to writing up your lessons and your units, your lessons for your units. The middle column, because this particular material came from a project-based learning program or organization, they have how do you teach process? You have to teach students how to generate questions. They don't just automatically generate good questions. You have to teach them how to analyze work based on a rubric. How do you use a rubric in chunks? How do you develop a timeline for a project process? How do you develop a timeline for a project? And when students get together to peer edit or evaluate or critique, how do you do that? And how do you do that professionally? I put that in quotes so that you are treating each other respectfully. These are all things that you scaffold so that they learn these strategies and then they use them independently. So you're scaffolding process and you're scaffolding independence. On the right side, you have content scaffolding, you model how to approach a challenging math scenario. So you walk through it with the students first before you ask them to do it, and then practice with them, guided practice. Making hypothesis in science, completing character analyses for reading charts and for fictional stories, engaging in Socratic seminars. What's interesting about this whole set of material is that it is constructivist. It's very much student-centered. It's very much teaching the students how to become independent with the strategies that we use as adults. And often we've forgotten how we learned those strategies. And so we have to go back and kind of break them down and reteach them to the students step by step. More strategies here. Some of them are reiterated. I think you can take your time with this and read through these. Extract a few of these to use in the lessons that you're designing for your unit. All of these are very good scaffolding strategies. These are the things that we're looking for when you're scaffolding your instruction. How are you supporting independent learning? How are you supporting mastery of content? And you can see a very well constructed scaffolded lesson leads students step by step to greater and greater understandings. So with that, I'll leave you with the review that we have covered: instructional scaffolding, gradual release of responsibility, and content scaffolding, step-by-step work toward mastery, and that you can use this material in designing your lessons and units. This is what we encourage you to do. I want to in large part thank the Buck Institute for Education. There's a very nice scaffolding article here, blog, that explains scaffolding in a nutshell. Very, very nice. You have to cut and paste this. So, scaffold away.